Okay, welcome everyone to this entry in the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia ACRL Professional Development Web Series. I'm Rocco Kermenes. I'm the chair of the Ad Hoc Professional Development Committee, and I'm very pleased today to be welcoming a septuplet of librarians from Kamloops, British Columbia at Thompson Rivers University to talk about how they were tasked with moving a library collection to new quarters with a tight deadline and a campus shutdown due to COVID-19. So I will turn the floor over to our hosts and disappear from the video screen to save bandwidth. So.
Thank you, Rocco. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to come and speak. What I'll do is I'm going to start sharing our presentation. Rocco said he was going to monitor the chat for us. And if you could just hold your questions to the end, we'd be happy to answer them. So let's begin, and let's make sure I can choose the right file to share. So hopefully you are all seeing our title slide, which says Moving a Library During a Pandemic. To begin with, let's make sure I can forward my slide. There we go. Let's just take a moment to think and reflect on the land on which you are situated on. We'd like to recognize that Thompson Rivers University campuses are on the traditional lands of the Kamloops to Secwepemc, the Kamloops campus, and the Tillamook, the Williams Lake campus, within Secwepemc-Ulu, the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. The region TRU serves also extends into the territories of the St'át'imc, the Inkkalkmuck, the Tskotin, Nukjalk, and the Gottchalk and Métis territories. As a settler on this land, we recognize and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So let me introduce you to our moving, steering, or planning team. And yes, it does take a village to move a library. I'm Kathy Gaynor. I'm the university librarian. Also speaking with you today is Tania Gottchalk, our associate university librarian. Elizabeth Rennie, instruction and research services librarian, whom I believe is having difficulty logging in. So, but we've got that covered. Katherine Watmough, our access services librarian. Julia Wells, our user engagement and student success librarian. Laura Davies, our library services support coordinator. And Michael Purcell, our systems librarian. Well, this is really a story of persistent advocacy, patience, and seizing opportunity when it presents itself. To begin with, I'll give you a little bit of a context that brought us to where we were last summer. The university's had an interesting journey from a small regional college serving the immediate area, primarily serving or offering courses to students to transfer to larger universities. In the early 90s, the college transformed into a university college, offering undergraduate degrees while still retaining some of its original trades and professional programming. And then in 2005, the institution became a full-fledged university offering undergraduate and graduate degrees. Naturally, during all of this evolution, the library had to adapt to its growing needs of its community. At the time of becoming a university college, the institution was serving about 5,000 students. And quickly growing, by 2008, the library was now supporting about 9,000 students. And it was really deemed that the college-sized library that we were operating in was no longer supporting the campus as it should have. By 2011, a new building was built on TRU, and it was called the House of Learning building, and it served as a multi-purpose building. And like many multi-purpose buildings, it served many but didn't really meet the needs of all. And in 2017, the library submitted a high-level space program or proposal to leave the original library building and move its entire operations into the House of Learning, consolidating our library services in one location. The board approved the plan and the library was scheduled to move into the House of Learning. We were given a target about 2025 and 2027. And while at the time it seemed like a long ways away, we felt that it gave us plenty of time to plan. Well, 2020 came along and we all know what happened that year. A pandemic, a global pandemic hit. And in the middle of April, I actually know exactly what time, it was 4:35. The provost called me at home and asked if we could take advantage of having a quiet campus and move the library into the House of Learning that summer. Oh, and by the way, could we have it done by the end of August? Our provost gave me 24 hours to think about it and to get back to her. Knowing that it was now or never, anticipating there was going to be financial constraints with recovering from a pandemic, I called her back and told her, why, yes, we can.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about safety in relation to our move. So in BC, the public health responses are legally driven by the BC Office of the Provincial Health Officer. And our current Provincial Health Officer is Dr. Bonnie Henry, who is well respected and admired for the approaches that have been taken in BC for managing the pandemic. Early in the pandemic, she famously began ending all communications with the catchphrase, be kind, be calm, and be safe. This from the top mantra has been, for the most part, adopted across BC, and we certainly tried to adopt it for our move in the library. The presidents of BC institutions, in response to directives from Dr. Henry, quickly set up a steering committee to develop COVID-19 go-forward guidelines for BC's post-secondary sector. And these provide protocols for post-secondary institutions on safety in all areas, including education, delivery, food services, retail services, and libraries. The guidelines have at this point been revised several times and will be revised again shortly. But based on these protocols, our TRU Office of Safety and Emergency Management developed a template to be used by each faculty department or division to address safety issues around COVID-19. TRU and other universities in BC opted to only deliver courses and programs on campus that required face-to-face instruction to be successful. For example, nursing, and the remainder of courses were quickly moved online, and library services were also delivered only online. Given that few people were on campus in the summer of 2020, the safety plan developed by the library considered only the work activities of library staff for the move. The plan had to detail exactly how many people were working in buildings, which at the time were the main library and the House of Learning, social distancing measures, cleaning protocols, and mask wearing precautions. And library staff were provided with the approved safety plan and educated on all aspects, including work schedules. In the next slide, Laura will talk about the scheduling people given the restrictions of the pandemic safety plan. Next slide.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to wait for the next slide to come up. There's not a lot of information on there. Unfortunately, I couldn't share the actual schedule due to confidentiality. We do use a platform, the SpringShare platform, and the LibStaffer portion of that component, which shows full names of the staff. So just backing up a little bit, normally during the intersessional hours, that is the lovely House of Learning there that we're moving into. Normally during this time, we would be in a pared down schedule. We would be in operating hours of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, with shorter hours in the House of Learning. We did have a section of the library on the 3rd floor there. So, and our staff had actually been at home at this point for approximately 6 weeks. So to get them back into sort of a groove and something completely different than what we'd normally be doing, once we had all the training online done, so all the virtual training that was put in place by, as Tania was talking about, the OSEM office, we had an exposure control plan in place, personal protection equipment, PPE training, and the WHMIS, the Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, that were to be done. Once we had started scheduling the staff to come back in the building, it was a slow integration to introduce all the staff to what we were expecting once they were actually in the building. And the safety plan also had us containing those numbers within both buildings. Normally, I would be staffing the library client service associates, who we call LCSA, or the techs. They are within our QP union, and they are the ones that I coordinate the work for. In this instance, we had to coordinate the work of anybody that was involved in the move. And using the LibStaffer platform, we were able to actually coordinate everyone's work within that. We were already accustomed to using the schedule, especially the LCSAs. They relied heavily on knowing what they were doing, where they were to be. Using that, we can also push it to our Outlook calendars, which we use, so we could coordinate the work that way. And this is where we started. I would look and speak with whoever was involved in the different sections. We were able to break the move down to what was needed, and you'll hear more of that later in the upcoming slides. We could color coordinate to where the staff were and actually check then to see that we were under that mandatory number of bodies in the building as well. And that way too, we could control the work that was being done into smaller tasks, allowing different groups of people to work together. So we were meeting the safety guidelines, as well as not having too many people in the building, but not having too many people together in the same space as well. And that way we could actually continue working with the safety plan, continue looking at what was upcoming. We would be looking at then the deadlines for the different smaller tasks that we had set out to complete it. So we used the same platform. It worked quite well for us because we were already accustomed to it. And what we were able to do, anyone who had admin then could actually go in and revise. So the last line is reevaluate, review, adjust, repeat. As Tania also mentioned, it's what we've done continuously and ongoing. And that program has allowed us to do that. Next slide.
Thanks, Laura. So I will just talk a little bit about the task of weeding. So when the decision was made to move our collections out of main library, taking over the entire House of Learning building in a pandemic, we knew we had a daunting task ahead of us. One of the first requirements was a long overdue, thorough weed of the collection, all to be done within a strict time frame of about 5 weeks. Our first big hurdle was obtaining weeding lists from all of the librarians. Because of COVID, lists had to be generated from home, as we were all still at home, and understandably challenging endeavor for all. Lists were divided by liaison area, so each librarian was responsible for creating pull lists for the call ranges in each of their areas, knowing that our target was to deselect over 20,000 items. So with the guidance of our collections librarian, Penny Haggerty, most librarians used Greenglass, a web-based analytics tool, which allowed us to create parameters for deselection of the collection. As lists started coming in, we began refining the process. First, where to organize and keep the lists. We had just started using Microsoft Teams for communication purposes. We were, less than a couple of months into the pandemic. So we decided to start there in Teams with the creation of task cards. As these were basically holding buckets, they filled up quickly. We then moved the completed lists over to a master list, which was basically an Excel spreadsheet. Secondly, we realized very quickly that the lists would need to be tightened up for the pulling. Some were submitted with many columns and formatted to make printing difficult. Always keeping in mind the point of view of the people who would actually be pulling the books, we formatted the lists with just the essential information to pull, i.e. call number, item ID number, and title. Also, again, to save time for technicians and other pullers, we had to ensure lists were in call number order. We separated the lists into achievable chunks with the goal of being able to pull, process, and discard the books from a list all in the same day. And I basically became keeper of the lists with to-do folders and done folders through the process. Katherine will now take you through the discarding and recycling dimension of this task.
So we decided that we wanted to be able to recycle our discarded books. We have a mandate within the library and within the university to be sustainable wherever we can. So the decision was made very early on that we would try to recycle as much as we could. We have had small projects before where we have done the same thing. So we were somewhat familiar with kind of the procedures around that. So what we had to do was arrange dumpsters and pickups from local recycling company. And we did that through facilities as well. So they were helpful in arranging that. Some of the things we had to consider were costs and timing. So we were kind of bound to working around their schedule as well as looking at some budgetary restrictions. For instance, we were charged by how many dumpsters we had, how many pickups, and by weight as well too. So that was probably the most challenging part, I think, is just coordinating with other departments and outside contractors. What we had to do for recycling was tear off the covers from the hardcover books, because I mean, they were all kind of paper or cardboard based, but they were recycled differently in the end of the cycle. So we had to, we set up stations where we would tear down the covers with X-Acto knives, and they could all be put into the same dumpsters at that time, but it was very physical work and time consuming as well too. So we had to fill the dumpsters. We tried to make it fun as well too. We made games out of, you know, how far we could throw things, or, you know, how many trucks we could get through. So we did try to keep an air of fun and collegiality as we went. So next slide.
All right, so Elizabeth Rennie is having a few challenges joining us today with the Wi-Fi, so I will be sharing Elizabeth's notes on moving the collection, and Katherine will also be sharing. So based on initial measurements taken when the move was first proposed, we knew that the collection needed to be moved onto 2 floors of the new building. The 3rd floor, that already housed about 1/3 of our collection on otherwise fairly empty compact shelving, and a basement storage room where our existing compact shelving from the main library would be installed once emptied, and where lower use material would go. Because there wasn't already shelving in the basement, and because we knew we couldn't be splitting the collection 1 shelf at a time while we filled moving carts, this meant the collection would be moved in 2 phases. First, summer 2020, we'd empty the main library and move everything to the 3rd floor. And secondly, later, we'd pull about 40% of the material for the basement, and we're still working on that now. After weeding, we physically remeasured and remeasured again every shelf of the collection being moved, and determined that it would just barely fit onto the existing 3rd floor compact shelving. We had measurements for each call number range and mapped out exactly how much space in the new building each section would require. We mapped out the 3rd floor, assigned each row and shelf a unique number, and physically labeled each shelf with masking tape with those numbers. Then we created slips of heavy-duty paper with matching labels, and then worked on going through the collection, measuring full shelf-length segments and inserting the paper labels into the books to mark where each shelf break occurred. Next slide, please, Kathy. Once this had been done, we knew exactly which shelf in the new building each segment of books in the old building was going to end up sitting on once moved. This meant that we could now start moving the collection, and didn't need to do so sequentially, as we could pick up any part of the collection and know where to place those books. This in turn permitted us to schedule multiple teams of people to work in different areas of the library for the actual move. Important for safe distancing, and because unloading books onto compact shelving meant that only certain rows were accessible at the same time. Next slide, please, Kath. Katherine, whoa.
So what we did as well too is we created a short video for staff explaining how the label system worked, how to load and label all the carts, and how to safely move the heavy carts as well too, because we were using book moving carts that were provided by some other libraries and from a moving company that we used, and they're quite large and heavy. So we created a video on showing what all the flags meant in the rows, as you can see in the picture there. Each of those labels coordinate with a shelf over in our other library, and then each of the bays were all marked on there. And we also shared information about who to contact and what to do if something looked out of order. I do have the video. I wasn't able to share it onto here because I only have it as an MP3, but it is available if you contact it with the provision that it's only for personal viewing. Next slide. Here are some other pictures as well too. You can see the big heavy carts there. And you can see also too, again, with trying to keep it fun and keeping people's spirits up. Very often you would see while we're labeling the trucks, people would put in some notes for the people receiving them on the other end. Next slide. So system changes, and I think Mike is doing this. Mike?
I can do that, yeah.
Awesome.
To start my video, one of the big things that we have to address when you move the library is how you work with the other libraries you linked with.
Next slide.
For example, we're in consortia, so we had to get rid of links to interlibrary loan. We also had to adjust our web discovery layer so that it would report the right locations for people. There's a lot of things that I didn't think of at the time, and for the first part of the move, I was busy creating lists for weeding. Something you probably don't think of when you're moving a building is how much of your library equipment is built in. We had a whole range of security gates and self-check machines. We had to hire vendor technicians to come and install that, and that was very difficult because obviously during the pandemic everybody had a call on installing or removing equipment. So it was a lot of work, and I would say it's still ongoing. One of the biggest changes is moving tens of thousands of volumes from one location in a system to the other, which is automated, but there's so many collections you've got to be organized or you forget something. And we're still noticing a few mistakes. Next slide.
So in the end, we were able to move our library successfully. We had, as we had mentioned, an aggressive timeline in terms of getting it done, and through a massive team effort, and it really was a team effort. It was library technicians, librarians, and library administration. We were able to complete this move with about 10 days to spare, which gave us some time to get ready for the fall semester. So what I'd like to say is we managed to accomplish the impossible by really pulling together, working together, and we managed to move a library during a pandemic. And at this point, I think we're happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Hi, I have a question. I'm in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, so we're in the Eastern Panhandle, and we're in a historic building, and we're moving to a purpose-built library at the end of the year. So my question is about book status. What did you do about books that had irregular status, things that were missing or lost according to you in some form or fashion? Because I assume the next time you do your inventory, you don't want to run into those missing books again. What did you do about that?
I can answer that. We have that's a really good question, because there are a lot of books like that. In our system, Circe Symphony, you create a discard user for all types of books. And when you discard stuff, it's actually like putting it into a recycle bin on your desktop. It's actually not discarded. So I created a whole bunch of discard users and kept all of those books in there. I did a report of everything that's in that in those discard users. So they're still kind of waiting around until we finish moving. We're in the process of doing the final part of the move now, is moving stuff into a storage location. So once they get moved into there, we're going to change their status in the system and then do a major inventory.
Great.
And the inventory hopefully will catch everything that is problematic. Now, if the inventory catches stuff that's somehow supposed to be in discard, we can easily move it out of discard back into the collection. You know, not physically, it's just electronic. I think what we're going to have to do, though, is the inventory will make the assumption if we can't find it straight away, it's gone, and then just remove those items. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Best of luck with your move.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. Putting on my outreach librarian hat, which is my other life, did you encounter any resistance to the move, or any slick public relations type things you did to make people aware of the move, given surprise, we've moved, you know?
Yeah, we're still educating our community about where we are. And it's complicated because of the pandemic. The campus is still operating in a remote fashion. There are few students on campus, few faculty on campus. We're working closely with our marketing and communications department to get the word out for fall. Our post-secondary education in the province of British Columbia is guided by the Minister of Advanced Education. And the minister has put out an order that we return to face-to-face instruction this fall. And I anticipate that this fall there'll be a lot more communication with our community about where we are. It hasn't been perfect. I'll share that with you.
I'd also like to add that when we were weeding, as you can imagine, large dumpsters outside of the library with librarians gleefully throwing books into them might have created a slight, optic problem. Because the campus was basically empty at that time, there were very few people walking around. We did actually have a couple of people noticing the dumpsters and the books. And asking about it. And we always just made sure that we were very aware of people around, and we would go and, we would communicate with people who would ask about what we were doing and why.
I think the phrase I was like, collection curation is something that libraries always do. And this was a curation process, and it wasn't vandalism or anything crazy, but you know how people get about books. So we were a little bit, we were very grateful that it was, it flew under the radar.
Thank you.
So I had a question about the video that you said that you made to show staff how to be handling some of those things. And I wondered, if it wasn't a pandemic, would you have made a video? And if the answer is no, how did that work out? And is that something that maybe you would carry forward, that there were some advantages to that?
I'll speak to that. We have wanted to have a more fulsome video tutorial in terms of reaching out to students in the past, and we've just never had the time to do it. So having the pandemic and having people work remotely, it actually was beneficial to that program that we wanted to be able to bring to the forefront. So we kind of really had to learn fast on the fly to use some of the video creation tools that the university provides to us. And I certainly am a proponent of using video tutorials for staff and for students, because for staff anyway, you know, it's something that's always available to them, you know, as a refresher. So I certainly personally feel like we will continue to use video training for staff in the future, and certainly for students as well moving forward. I want to be able to have 24/7 support for students. And I know a lot of universities and colleges already do that with YouTube channels and things like that. But we haven't been able to have that as a fulsome part of our service to students.
Thank you.
It's a great question though, Claire.
If there's time for one last question, I know we're already rounding over the 12:30 mark. This is Nick Gardner with Potomac State. I had a quick question about examples of the cards that you used in Microsoft Teams. Are you guys, is there anything that you could screen share or show as an example, or is it too proprietary? It would just be nice to understand, because a lot of us have Teams, but we don't really tackle, or sorry, we don't really tap into its true power.
I think we could certainly do that. It may be, Rocco, is there an opportunity for us to share things with the presenters afterwards in terms of like emailing things out?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have the registration list, so we can send that out and even include supplemental material with the video in the video description.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
I have certainly loved using Teams as a way to communicate and to share documents. Documents are editable in their in live time. Maybe the buckets and the tasks didn't work out as much for us, but certainly I have loved the program, and I'm sure we'll continue to use it after we go back face to face.
Are there any other questions? Always got a program that wait time in there.
Oh, wow. It sounds like someone definitely wants you all to come back and talk more about Teams in general. So great job, guys.
Well, thank you, everybody. I wish everybody to stay safe, be calm, and be kind to one another, as Dr. Bonnie Henry says, and hopefully we can get through to the end of this pandemic, and we're all good to go. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. And let me thank you. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Sorry. Thank you, Kathy, Tania, Julia, Michael, Laura, and Katherine, because this was amazing. Thank you so much. This was super helpful.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.